Can y'all hear that when she says that?
Yes.
It's so funny. That's a new Zoom thing. They just started doing that in the fall. Okay, so let me go over a couple of things housekeeping wise. I should have all of your grades done this weekend except for the final. I should have all those done. And then the final will be Friday, the 18th. I'm going to open it. And then it'll close on the 23rd, which is a Wednesday. And it's the same format as the midterm. It is comprehensive. So there'll be some questions from the midterm, not a lot, but there'll be a few questions from the midterm on there. You can still use your study guide. You can still use your book. That's not a problem. Everyone did pretty well on the midterm. This class actually did really well because I kind of keep a tally of all the classes, and you guys did pretty well on that, which is good. Then today we're going to talk about cultural competency at the beginning. We'll spend some time doing that. And then we're going to jump to marriage and family assessments. And I'm going to do some other things with that too. And then at the end, if we have time, I am going to talk more about behavioral assessments. I think we'll have time. It just kind of depends on how much we talk and how many questions everyone has and things like that. So I never really know when I plan the class out, I try to plan more than I have time for because I never really know what's going to happen. So that's kind of our plan today. Since it's a little bit smaller class size, if you have questions as I'm going, don't hesitate to jump in. The one thing that I would like, if you can, when you do jump in, if you feel comfortable and it's okay to like pop your video on, because that tells me that you're like going to ask a question and I can slow down. If you don't feel comfortable putting your video on, that's fine. But I just like to, if I can see you when we're talking, that's even better. So no pressure either way. Okay. Do you guys have any questions about anything course-wise before I start? Anybody have any questions? Okay. All right. I'm going to flip a couple things here. Assuming that at some point or another during your studies, you either have or are going to take a class on culture and diversity specifically. And so I'm not going to dive, whole into all what those classes would be, but I'm going to talk about it from the standpoint of assessment and then talk about it practically, clinically. And one of the reasons why I think this particular topic is important is because the longer you're in practice, the more different types of cultures you will interact with. And so I realize that as I say the word culture, that can be seen as a really broad term, and culture itself is pretty broad. And so I'm kind of using culture in this sense to incorporate your ethnicity, gender, socioeconomic status. It could be education. It could be, there's some, even, and if we think about, if we wanted to get really specific, there's even cultures within cultures. And so if you grew up in a certain part of the state, let's say, you might have a specific culture versus another part of the state or one part of the country, or you might have one type of culture versus another part of the country. And so there's also cultures within cultures. And I like to, I'm very visual. So I kind of think about it in terms of like buckets or I usually draw circles when I'm writing things, but kind of circles of things. The one thing that I had to kind of struggle through when I was a student back in doesn't feel that long ago, but I was out of school for a long time and went back to school in my 30s, and one of the first classes I took in my studies to become a therapist was a culture and diversity class, which I thought in my head that I was fairly comfortable working with, doing multicultural work. Like in my head, I thought, I can handle that. And what I learned with one of my first jobs is that I wasn't as ready as I thought I was. And so I had to do a lot of work in that area on myself, really, to kind of get my head around what it actually means to do that, do work with folks that you come from a different background or culture than you do. And I'm talking about across the board belief system, culture, everything. And so one of the first professors in my PhD program that I worked with, we actually worked in the addiction arena, but he was one of the first ones to kind of frame this idea of being culturally competent. He framed it in a way that just made sense to me. And that's really helped me a tremendous amount as I've moved forward. And so I want to talk about that this morning, right off the bat. And then we'll kind of go from there. But as we think through it, and again, some of you might have already had a class when it comes to working with different cultures and different diverse groups. I'm kind of curious, have you guys ever heard this term or thought about this term, cultural competence? I'm just wondering if anybody has.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. But what's kind of your thought process or takeaway when we talk about cultural competency? What do you take from that?
I think it's a broad understanding of the varying cultures that are in our world right now. Just not necessarily specifically learning about one culture or another, but you are competent in all the cultures around.
Okay. So having kind of a general idea of different cultures that you might interact with or be with, especially, clinically. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else?
I kind of think also being aware of your own ideas, biases about other cultures, and kind of trying to, I can't remember now, I can't think of the word that we were talking about in another class this semester about being able to kind of put yourself, like having cultural empathy. I think being able to put yourself in the place of another client of a different culture.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Right. So having the ability to try to see things through their eyes, or be in their shoes, so to speak.
Right.
Okay. Anything else?
I think it also involves a certain amount of flexibility in terms of being able to respond appropriately to the person in front of you, even if you're not totally familiar with their culture, being able to kind of on the fly, when you realize you're going in the wrong direction with them, being able to kind of switch gears in a way that's appropriate for them.
Gotcha. Okay. I think those are great. I think the way you guys are talking about it sounds awesome. I'm going to add to the conversation and do a little bit of tweaking to a couple of things that you guys are saying in terms of being culturally competent. One thing that's I feel like is a foundation to everything you guys are saying is this idea that you realize you don't know everything and you don't know what you don't know sometimes. So for example, if I'm sitting across from any of you here in a clinical setting, I don't know your culture. You do. Like there's one expert in the room of the culture, and that's you, not me. Now, I might have a broad understanding of some aspects of people's cultures. I might have a broad understanding of certain things, but there's only one person that's expert, and that's you. And so it brings about this idea that you're going to have just kind of a natural curiosity about someone that's sitting across from you in terms of like what has it been to walk in their shoes, or what have things been like for them. And that makes you ask questions differently, I think. At least it does for me in a lot of ways. And so there's this idea of having and these ideas aren't mine, by the way. These are these conversations have been going on for a while, but this idea between the old school way of psychology, especially psychoanalytics, psychoanalysis was kind of like there's an expert and then you go to an expert to get whatever you need. That was kind of the understanding, and that's kind of the modern way of thinking. As we've made shifts in certain models of therapy, especially, there's a little bit of a difference that we are, I think, trying to achieve, and that's kind of this idea of being one down from someone. Not that you don't understand people, but that you are all of a sudden realizing that you're not the expert in the room of their life. They're the expert of their life. And so when you want to understand their life, obviously you're going to ask them about their life, not tell them what their life is like. Hopefully that makes sense. It's kind of like, and this is going to date me now, but this idea of the show Columbo, he was like a genius at being curious with people and kind of asking questions in that way. And that's really a way of just being generally curious, but also realizing that you don't know what you don't know. Like, I don't know everything about you guys. I mean, I probably know some things, but I don't know everything. And I for sure don't know your experiences. I for sure don't know the experiences that have shaped you, but I would like to know those things. So when you're sitting across from someone, no matter if there's cultural similarity or differences between you, when you have cultural competency, you realize that you don't know everything about them. So having that it's called not knowing position, where you're kind of approaching them from that not knowing stance. And in my experience, this not knowing stance has worked in some really fascinating ways. Even with my kids, it works a lot of times. Now, I've worked with teenagers for a long, long time, so I've kind of taken that not knowing stance with teenagers, not my own teens, but other people's teenagers for a long time. And they seem to really resonate with that, because you're basically not telling them what you're asking them questions and kind of trying to understand them and building empathy with them. When you take a not knowing position, you hopefully also take down walls and barriers and defenses is the other part of it. So I'm going to give you guys an example. And this is just something from my own clinical experience early in my clinical career. So this would have been 12 years ago or so, almost 12 years ago. All right. Yeah, almost 12 years ago. I worked in a facility it was mandatory therapy for men and women coming out of federal prison. So they would come out, and part of their sentence would be, you have to do X amount of time in therapy. And we had the contract with the Bureau of Prisons, so they would come to us. And this was in Lubbock. And so we were super, super busy. And so I'm white and a male, and in their eyes, a lot of times middle class or whatever, however they would see me. And so most of the inmates, the former inmates that I worked with, were not white. Most of them, some of them were, but most of them weren't. Most of them were men. We did have a few women, but most were men. And so I learned really early on that even things that I had learned in class, let's say about a specific culture or an ethnicity, wasn't necessarily always the same when you were sitting across from someone. And that was about the time that I was kind of learning about this concept of kind of like this not knowing position and kind of a one down stance. And it served me really well, because it allowed me to really try to understand where they're coming from, not just from the standpoint of like being in prison, but just like in their life and experiences in their life. And I had more than one of them kind of tell me, I really thought you were going to be this way, but you turned out to be this way. And I'm not saying that to brag on myself. I'm literally just saying, if I hadn't learned about this kind of idea of being one down, I don't know that I would have done that. I don't know if I would have really worked with them the same way. So I had a chance to really develop that really early in my clinical practice, so to speak. So for like 3 years when I was at Texas Tech, I got the chance to kind of just literally just do that every day. And it's something that I continue to do even now with clients. And so even when there's times when you're like, oh my gosh, you're doing the same thing every time over and over, but you keep asking about it because you're trying to help them understand. when you take a one down position with people, it just puts down defenses and puts down walls, at least in my experience. And so I feel like this idea of cultural competency is very important. And especially when we're working with clients, whether you're assessing them or you're trying to help them with their goals, whatever you're trying to do with them, being able to do that is really, really helpful. And so I just wanted to bring that up and kind of talk about it. And I'm glad that it sounds like a lot of you have kind of talked through this and thought about these things. Do you have any questions about anything I'm saying right now, or comments or anything? I don't want to glaze over it. I want to make sure that everybody's kind of tracking on the same page. I'm going to jump over here. I'm going to jump over here to okay. So sorry guys, I'm going to move some stuff out of the way here. So I can get to what I want to get to. All right. So, how many of you kind of feel like you have an idea of the population you want to work with, at least starting out? What do you think?
Mine changes. Most recently, over the last few days, it changed to educators.
Educators, okay.
Like teachers, grade school
Right.
teachers.
What made the change?
Probably being in the position that I am at my school now, and finding that a lot of the teachers, and I don't know, because while I was in education before the pandemic, I wasn't in the classroom before the pandemic. So I don't know if the headspace that teachers are in now is the same as it was prior to, but just having some informal knee-to-knee conversations with my teachers on campus makes me consider them as a population that I think I want to serve.
Gotcha. Okay. That's interesting. Do we have other teachers here? Anyone else?
I am a teacher. Is that what you asked?
Yeah.
I am a teacher.
Yeah. Okay. I've worked with teachers a lot over the years, and I would say it's very different now. At least from what I hear, it seems very different now than what it was before COVID. Not just because of COVID either. There's other things that are going on, but it seems like it is different. Seems that way, for sure. In the medical field and in education, seems different.
Yeah, I've been a teacher for 18 years, and there's a huge difference. And like you say, it's not just COVID, it's just things have changed so much.
Right. Yeah. Do any of you, or are any of you thinking specifically like, I want to just work with kids, or I want to just work with adolescents, or I just want to work with adults, or anything like that? I'm just kind of curious. Or some of you kind of like, you can be generalist, right? You can just say, oh, I'll work with anyone. What are you thinking?
I'm interested in working with couples. Sorry, Camilla. Or someone started talking, sorry. Yeah, I'm interested in working with couples and blended families.
Okay.
I'm
Good.
the same. I would like to work with the couples 30 plus years old, because I feel like people before 30 years old doesn't really know what kind of relationship they want. I feel like they already know after 30.
Camilla's like, if you're not 30, I'm not working with you. I understand what you're saying.
Because I
gotcha.
feel like I was immature when I was before 30. I didn't know what I wanted in my life. I wasn't
Yeah.
ready for kids. After 30, it's more, everything make
Yeah.
more sense.
Yeah, some of us are still immature. We still haven't figured it out. I got you. Beth, what were you going to say?
I was going to say I want to work with specifically, I'm open to a few things, but mainly women. I want to work with women.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Anybody else? I'm just curious.
I think I would like to work with mostly adults. I mean, I'm not opposed. I don't necessarily want to work with young children, but adolescents or young adults would be okay.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay.
I want to do geriatrics.
Yeah. Okay.
But I think so. My goal is to get a PhD because you can't, as far as I know, working in a therapy practice, none of the LPCs can take Medicare.
Yeah. I think that's going to change, but yeah, right now there's a big fight, right? There's actually a big, huge, not fight. That's a bad word. Sorry. That's a really bad way to say it. There is a lot of discussion right now going on about Medicare, Medicaid in terms of who can take it and who can't.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So right now I work at a therapy office. Only our PhDs can see.
And
And so there's a huge gap that's missing, and that's unfortunate.
And I'm assuming it's psychologists.
Yeah.
Right. So a PhD in psychology or a PsyD or something like that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And then have you heard anything about any updates to whether interns are able to charge like insurance rates? Any update to that? Because I know there was like some talk about that was being discussed for interns to be able to be covered under insurance.
Yeah, I don't know if that's changed. As far as I know, you can't right now, but I don't know of anything that has changed, and that's really up to the insurance companies themselves. And so technically now when you guys go into, even as an associate, you can charge whatever you want. You can charge any rate you want. But being on an insurance panel as of right now, I believe you have to be fully licensed.
Mm-hmm.
That's how it is right now. I'm fairly certain. And that's true for.
Yeah, there was just like a discussion, and I guess a vote was going to be.
It's really right now what they changed actually is that LPC associates can actually own their own practice. That's what the big thing that changed. LMFT associates already could do that, but now both can.
Mm-hmm.
I think there will be some changes post-COVID to some stuff too, but right now those are the big things that have changed as far as I know. But the insurance companies are not always willing to be open to associates being on a panel right now. So I don't know if that will change in the future, but it's possible. One of the reasons why I was asking just kind of where you guys are thinking about working is whether you work with kids or teens or adults, at some level, you're going to work with families. And when I say that, I mean, maybe not directly, you might not like directly work with the family in the room, but everyone that you work with is bringing their family into the room, either from their experience, childhood, whatever. And so of course, I'm an LMFT, so I'm going to resonate with family systems. I've always resonated with that. I can use other theories and other models, but when we start to think about working with, especially couples and families, that's the kind of the way you think about it. But that's actually the way you should think about it when you're working with almost anybody. Even Brittany, from your standpoint, even working with older adults, there's going to be a significant need for that in the next 20 years for sure. And one of the things that's actually happening is there's this kind of sandwich generation of folks that have older adult parents and then younger kids, and they're sandwiched in between them. That type of family is growing, getting bigger, like that particular, it's kind of a niche, actually. It's kind of like blended families. It's gotten bigger over time. This is the same thing with that kind of sandwich generation. And so I want to talk about systems theory, and I'm going to give you guys like the 5-minute version. There, if you take couples and family, you'll get the kind of longer version of this. But I'm going to talk about it from the standpoint of just kind of overview of it. So what I like to do is, if you have a pen and paper in front of you, even your computer, whatever you have, if you wouldn't mind, just write down every, starting with your immediate family, right? Every person that you come in contact with, and start with your immediate family, like your spouse or partner, or child, whatever, just who you come in contact with. And then after that, branch out, right, to maybe extended family, or maybe church, or maybe work, branch out to work. And then in work, if you want to put a few people that you come in contact with at work, you can put that, or who you come in contact with at church. And then you can even branch out from that if you want, from people you come in contact with, maybe from your kids or from your, friends. And then if you don't mind after that, maybe even put, hey, I'm also part of school, right? I'm part of this kind of school culture. And then maybe who you come in contact with when it comes to school. If you guys wouldn't mind, I'm going to give you a couple minutes to do that. If you wouldn't mind doing that. And then just keep that in front of you, because we're going to use that here for our next few minutes.
Is it in contact in person or over the phone? Because my family in Russia, so
Yeah.
But I do talk to them every day.
Yep. Absolutely. If you talk to them on the phone or video or anything, right? Our world's changed a little bit. We actually see people and talk to them at the same time, even if we're not face to face. One of the things I want you to think about as you're doing that is, and no matter how some people write a list, some people do, make a picture, however you did it. One thing I'd like for you to think about is interacting with each person or each group. What does that look like? Like, how do you interact with them? Maybe you play a different role with different groups, let's say. Maybe the interactions are more relaxed with some groups and a little bit more intense with others. I mean, I'm not sure how they work with you, but how do you interact with each person that you've kind of listed, or each group that you've listed? And as you're thinking about that, if you could somehow star or circle or underline the people that you would say, I interact with these people the most, probably. Even Camilla, even if you talk to them on the phone, like even if it's you talking to them on the phone every day, like I still interact with them a lot. Like if you have interactions with them either in person or on the phone, either star or circle or underline, somehow highlight the people that you say, I would interact with these people probably the most. Of this whole list, here's the core group of X amount of people that I interact with the most. And out of curiosity, of all the star or circles or underlines or highlights, how many people is that for each of you? It's going to be different probably. That's fine.
Do kids count or not?
Absolutely.
Okay. Well,
Kids
then
always count.
5 people for me then.
5. Okay.
Yeah, I have 5 that I talk to basically every day.
Okay.
I have 9 that I talk to almost every day, if not every other day.
Okay. Good.
I have 5 that I talk to individually pretty much every day, but there's a group that's a group of 10 of us that we as a group chat, we literally talk every day. So
Right. Right. Is it a group text chat?
it's group me. Yeah.
Group me. Okay. Yep.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
I would say about 10 to 12 also.
Okay.
I have 8.
8. Okay. Of those people or groups that you interact with directly, if you think about this, you are one part of that whole interaction, right? Does that make sense? Like you're one part of it. So
I don't
whether you're
understand.
whether you're interacting with 5 people or 10 people, that whole interaction is a whole, right? Like if you were to draw a circle and put those 5 or 10 people in that circle and then draw connections between them, right? All those parts come together to make a whole. And so systems theory basically says that if you change an interaction in one of those places, there's going to be a change of interaction or change of something in the other ones too. For example, I'll use a marriage, like a couples example, and I can use a family one too. Like in a couple, if you're working with a couple and they come in and they want to work on everyone wants to work on communication. So you help them change their communication, right? How they do it. And one of them starts to, let's say they never have really opened up emotionally even, or really opened up in any way. And then they start opening up and they start talking more about what's going on inside them to their spouse. And let's say this is the first time in 15 years that they've ever done that. What kind of change would that bring about in their marriage? What do you think?
Well, you'd hope it would be positive.
Right? Could it be negative?
Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And the reason why I bring that's so that one change is going to have a ripple effect, because then it's going to affect other parts of those relationships, right? So for example, in a family, let's say, and I'll use whatever, family five, and one of the kids has something happens with one of the kids at school, and they get in trouble and get in a fight, and they have to stay home for a week. That has no effect on the family, some effect on the family. How does it affect the family?
It affects the family a lot, especially if the kid is younger and the parents both work, you've got to figure out all of those things. And then that in turn affects the parent's job.
Right.
It has ripple effects.
Right. So what we're talking about is literally systems theory. If one thing happens here, something else is going to happen here. So the idea being, in systems theory, when we talk about families, so it's couples or families or whoever you're working with, if you can change and work on the interactions between the parts, you can start to change the parts. For example, if you help the communication between parts, you would hope that eventually that change of communication would become more healthy. So then the parts will become more healthy. And those healthy parts then start to spread that health to other parts of the system. For example, one of the reasons why I started working with couples, originally I went in to get my therapy degree because I wanted to work more intensely with teenagers, because that's what I'd always done. And then I was like, wait a minute, the family is really important. So I kind of want to work with families. And what I realized through my practicum experiences is that if mom and dad or the couple is working well, usually that you got a better shot at the family working well. So I started focusing on the parents working well and what was going on between them. Doesn't make everything perfect everywhere else, but you got a better shot if they're working well, if that makes sense. And so for me, it's like, well, I want to work on the parents and help them be the best they can be, both individually and together. And one way that we think about it from a systems perspective is the interactions between them, how they communicate. And that's, when I say interact, I could mean anything, right? Tone of voice, nonverbals, how we say things, the things that we do, the things we say we're going to do, but we don't do. Like there's a multitude of things that happen that can impact how we interact with people. Does that make sense? Hopefully. The reason why I'm talking about it this way is because if you think about working with people as individuals, I think it's also helpful to remember that that individual is part of another system. They're part of something else that impacts them in ways that they might not even think about, if that makes sense. Any question about that? Hopefully that makes sense. I'm hoping.
It makes perfect sense, actually. Yeah. I was recently talking to one of my, well, she's not friend, just a lady who I know, and she was talking about her son having the problems, he depressed. Actually, I told her to come to you. I don't know if she made it yet. So, and while I'm talking to her, I figured out the problem in her. She's overprotective, and he's 19 years old. He has so many problems because of her. It was so noticeable. And I told her, why don't you go to the counselor? And she didn't see it.
But she didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah. Probably 90% of working with teenagers is working with what?
Parents.
Their parents.
Mm-hmm.
Right? For most
Yes.
part. Not because everyone's messed up. It's just, that's just how systems work.
Yes.
That's just how they work.
Yeah, she's baby him so much. 19 years old, should be independent, dating, have his own private life, not his mom with him every step, and he doesn't even have a car.
Yeah. The other thing to remember here, actually, you're bringing it up now, Camilla, you're talking about what I'm about to say. When we start to assess families, couples, even individuals, we can start to look at how they interact with each other, the ways in which they interact with each other. And that gives us a lot of information. For example, like if someone is over functioning, mom or dad, doesn't matter who it is. I've seen moms over function. I've seen dads over function. I've seen grandparents over function. I've seen kids over function for parents. When I say over function, I mean exactly what it sounds like. Doing things for them so much that they don't ever really learn to do it for themselves, which is one thing when the kid's 5 or 4, but when they're 15 or 16, like my almost 15-year-old son, who this year has gone through a metamorphosis of change. And one of the big changes was band. It changed his whole world. He had no idea what was about to hit him. And he actually did really well with it. But one of the things it did is it made him internally motivate himself to get up and get going in the morning, because he has to be there early and that kind of thing. And my wife and I made the really scary decision to not do anything to help him do that. Like we wanted him to do that on his own. So if he was late, right? And that's really hard to do because I don't know if y'all know anything about teenage boys, but they're not real, with it a lot of times. But when you have families that over function for each other, then they can become codependent in a lot of ways. The communication starts to really become chaotic. And what we think is becoming connective in a family becomes disconnective, because you don't have to be connected when someone's doing everything for you, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So
yes, it does. I experienced the same thing with my 16-year-old daughter this last year and a half too. So yeah, makes sense.
And obviously we're going to help our kids. We're not going to like hang them out to dry. We're going to still help them, but we have to think about what we're trying to help them do, which is one of the first questions you're going to ask a parent if they bring a teenager to you, especially. What is it that you are asking for, or what is it that you're seeing? If it's more about them and what they're feeling anxious about, then that's what you probably should talk to them about, right? Versus now, a lot of times when teenagers coming in, there is something going on that you do need to help them with. And that's fine. But you can make some fairly good assessments watching interactions between these parts. Like you could look at that list that you have right in front of you and kind of look at how you interact with each part and what each interaction is like. It's probably different for certain parts, and that's fine. There's no big deal with that. But there might be certain parts that you're like, oh, when I interact with them, this certain thing happens and it makes me anxious, or I don't really like that thing. Or the opposite, right? Hey, when I interact with these parts or these folks, I really love that interaction because I just feel good and it feels safe and it works really well. Which I use attachment theory. So my attachment theory tells me I want to help those parts interact in safe ways, not perfect ways, but safe and secure ways. So that's what I'm looking for and trying to help them do so that they can have safe, productive, healthy interactions with each other, if that makes sense, hopefully. And so the different theory or different model of therapy you use will also inform you in how you help people interact with each other, right? So that I'm bringing this, again, this is like 30,000 foot view of family systems theory. It's kind of really probably more like 100,000 foot view because there's a lot to it. But the dynamics and the patterns that you can see patterns and things like that. When you start to work with people in how they interact with each other, you can see really significant changes in so many different areas. So that's kind of in a nutshell, kind of what having a systemic approach looks like. Here's the catch with the working with couples, families, when we talk about interactions and assessments. I want to jump to this. So on that same sheet, if you can drop down and just write, you can write a square for, and I'm just going to use a couple because it's easier. So a square for a guy and then a circle for girls. And that's a genogram. Those are symbols in genograms. We're going to talk about that here in a second. So both of those individuals that you have in front of you that you draw, right now, we can give it pretty much any type of assessment to each one of those individuals, right? We can assess them for anxiety, depression, ADHD, personality, you name it. We can basically assess for it, right? Individually. Now draw an arrow that goes between both, right? The process or interaction or the patterns between them, we don't have a good way of assessing for right now. We can individually assess them and make some inferences on their interactions based on those assessments. But right now, we don't have a way to really effectively actually assess the interaction between them. Now we can get fairly close, like for example, on a prepare enrich or a prepare, like a premarital assessment, SYMBUS. Well, enrich does kind of the same thing. The marital satisfaction inventory, the revised one especially, the dyadic adjustment scale, does a pretty good job of, they're still taking it individually. They're not taking it together per se. They're still taking it individually, and they've done a good job of at least giving you results that combine the scores to give you, you can make some inferences about how they communicate, for example, or how they do. Like for example, that one of the most thorough couples assessments is the marital satisfaction inventory. And it actually looks at several different components of their relationship and will give you a pretty good read as to what's going on in the relationship, in their marriage. It's very thorough. It takes a little while to take, like each person takes it. What's also good about it is it's pretty easy to give and it's very easy to score, which makes it really easy to give the results of, actually. And so, and I think your book talks about it probably specifically. That's one of the ones that I've used in the past a lot. But what you're trying to do when you assess couples or families is you really want to try to assess the interactions. It doesn't mean you don't want to assess the individuals, because you do. Every assessment basically gives an assessment to the individual, but you have to make some inferences when it comes to the results that you get. Does that make sense, hopefully, to everybody? I'm hoping. Any question about that? So what that means is when we're having trouble, when we don't have like the full way to assess the interactions or the process between them, there's some, it makes it hard to sometimes like know the direction to go with them at times. Not all the time. Sometimes there's going to be a lot of times where individuals, couples, families, teenagers come to you and they can all out say, hey, here's what's happened. Here's what I want to work on. Here are the things that are going on. That's great. And that's probably a large majority of the time. There's going to be other times when people are going to come to you and say, I know I need to come. I feel like something's off or something's not right. I'm not exactly sure what it is. That's when some of these assessments can really help you at least get a direction. You can give them that assessment. And as you give the feedback and you talk about it with them, they can go, yeah, this makes more, like this area that you're talking about makes a lot of sense to me right now. Maybe that's what's going on. And so that's one of the kind of difficulties of doing assessments in marriages and families, is that you sometimes have to kind of try different things to get a good assessment of what's happening. Obviously, if a couple comes to you and they're, they've been incessantly fighting for, months, then they're having trouble with conflict, they're having trouble with communication. There's probably been some kind of I call them attachment, like an attachment injury, emotional injuries happen probably, or something like that. Sometimes those are easy to kind of work through and get to the heart of. But sometimes if they come in and they don't know exactly what it is, it's a little bit difficult. I just had a new couple that I'm going to start working with, and I met with the husband first, and then I met with the wife, and the husband at the very end, like I'm literally like 2 minutes left in the session, said, because he knew that they needed to come, and he knew that they were kind of veering apart, and they had been for some time. So we kind of talked about that. And then very end, like 2 minutes left, and this happens all the time. At least I feel like it happens all the time. He said, oh yeah, and about 6 years ago, I had an emotional affair with a coworker. And then, and a year later, my wife actually had a physical affair with someone she was working with. Like threw it out like, oh yeah, maybe this would be something that happened. But in his mind, it happened 6 or 7 years ago, so it wasn't a big deal. Now, in my mind, that's like, well, maybe we should have led with that. Maybe that's what we should have talked about first. But when you have couples that come in, they might not be thinking about those things as being something that might have affected the last 6 or 7 years of their life, if that makes sense. And so sometimes it's difficult to assess the things that are going on, because they might not even know in their head, they might not know yet exactly what they're trying to fix. Like when you work with couples, especially, 100% of the couples will say, I want to work on my communication. 100% of them. That's great. And you can do that. But underneath the communication, there's usually other things. And sometimes it's harder to assess what those other things are sometimes. I feel like I'm talking this to the ground. Does that make sense, hopefully, to everybody? Any questions about that?
It makes sense.
Okay. Okay. When we talk about doing basically when you interview the family, like in an intake or maybe the first couple of sessions, you can assess certain things like how their family's structured, how they do things. I like to ask, who plays what role in the family? How do you decide on who does what, whether it's chores, or how do you make decisions when those things happen? Like, how do you make a financial decision? How do you make a decision on, where you go to eat even? I mean, I've been consistently shocked at how many people fight over like picking where to go to eat or who takes out the trash. Or I had a couple I worked with one time, and they had one of the largest fights I've ever had in my office in front of me was over the fact that one of them did not squeeze out the sponge enough for the other one. Literally like a 30-minute fight about that. And so that tells you other things that might be going on. It's not the sponge, right? It's something else that's happening. You can look at their affect. You can look at their tone. You can do this even virtually. You can see and feel. You can feel emotion virtually. You can feel certain parts of their process even virtually. You can feel that. But doing a good interview can help you. The book has some fairly good like checklist types of interview questions that you can ask. You can develop those yourself as you get experience working with people. You can kind of develop some of the questions that you would ask people, or some of the ones that you're always going to ask. You'll kind of develop that over time. One of the great things about working with families, couples, individuals that I have found is using what's called like family mapping. And one of those is using a genogram, which is really kind of cool. And so I had this up already, and then I totally shut my browser down. So I'm going to try to share this again with you guys. Let me share my screen real quick. Hang on just one second. Can everybody see that, hopefully?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. All right. Okay. So, and some of you probably, if you've taken the marriage and family class, you've seen this, but so basically this is a way to map interactions, patterns, structures, boundaries, communication in a family. You typically want to do at least 3 generations of the family. In this case, looks like we got a little bit more than that, which is fine. And you can do this type of assessment with individuals. Like I've done this with individuals before that were trying to understand some family patterns that had come up. Maybe as we go through the course of therapy, they keep bringing up like, yeah, I remember when this happened in childhood, or I remember this specific thing, and they keep bringing it up. You want to ask more about it, but they can't really remember everything about it. A lot of times, if you start doing something like this, and you start mapping it with them, and then you let them see it, you can show it to them. All these symbols mean different things like this. Like these guys are actually connected, but have a very not great relationship at some level. These dotted lines are usually a distant relationship. These little kind of ridge lines here are usually conflict between them. Things like that. The solid double line usually means a fairly healthy interaction. This particular couple looks like they've probably cut off all ties, which obviously going to have an effect here. With this, we could just look at this one right here and make a lot of inferences, but like it looks like the original spouses are cut off from each other, but the new spouse has a better relationship with the old spouse's child, basically, right? You can kind of see that too. So this is just one way to do it. There's other kinds of mapping things that you can do. One of the things I like doing, this is a little easier when I teach this in class, but you can do, you can bring families up and basically do a sculpting with them. So I've worked with some large families in the past, like families of like 5, 6, 7, like 5 kids, 2 parents kind of thing. Even with families of 5, I've done it. But you basically bring them up. So you bring every family member up into the room, and you kind of clear all the chairs and everything out, put everyone in the middle, and then you basically pick a person. I typically will pick the person that appears to have the least amount of power and control in the family, or the least amount of say in the family. And then you basically have them, you choose an event. Like sometimes people choose, hey, let's choose what an average night is in our house, or let's choose, sometimes people come in because they've had a fight, let's choose this particular conflict. And then you basically have them sculpt what people look like inside that event. Here's the key though. They don't touch the other members of the family. You're the ones that move people around, and you kind of put people where they tell you to put people, and you have them do that. And then at the end, you let everyone kind of see where everyone's standing, what action you can even have them like pointing fingers or like turned away, or the phone has been great. I've used phones. You can have them in their phone. And then at the end, you can kind of talk about and process what that looks like. It gives you a lot of really good information about how people interact with each other. That's really helpful to do with families. And that's something that I've done quite a bit when working with families. I've even done things like sand tray therapy with families before, and that works in couples. I've done that with couples as well. But those are just some of the kind of bigger ones that you can kind of look at and read through. And I think the book talks about these, but those are probably some of the ones that are that you would use the most if you work with families or couples. So any questions about those things before we keep moving on? Get over here to the cell screen. There we go. All right. Before I move forward, do you guys have any questions about anything we talked about so far? Any questions? Okay. Let's talk about working with people in the room when things get heated, where there's like a big conflict even in the room. Whether that's, I'm going to talk about it in 2 ways. And this is actually the second semester I've done this, or I've actually talked about this in terms of doing virtual sessions with families or couples where things get heated in the session virtually. So I'm going to talk about it in 2 ways. Like if you're face to face, you would still handle things fairly similarly in terms of de-escalation. One of the things that you want to assess for early on is any type of violence or conflict that they're having with each other. Around 55% of couples actually have some form of even small violent interactions in the history of their marriage. It's around 55%. And so I typically do, within the first couple of sessions, I typically have a time where I talk to each of them individually and just kind of assess for that. And one of the ways that I try to do that, you can do that with assessments too. Like I was talking about the marital satisfaction inventory. There's an actual category that looks at conflict and kind of looks at aggression and kind of gives it a scale. But you can also do it through an interview kind of style. And one of the things that I try to do is ask about conflict, because everyone, every couple has a conflict or does conflict in a certain way. And so I'll start asking about that. And I typically do ask specifically, have that, what's it like? How does it start? Is it just verbal? Have there ever been times where it's been physical, or anything like that? And most of the time when you ask about it, they're gonna give you information when it comes to if their conflicts are either currently or in the past have been physical in nature. And the reason why you do that is because, I started doing that mainly because I was doing emotionally focused therapy, and you don't want to do a lot of emotional focused therapy if there's still like active violence happening, because the therapy that you do tends to escalate people emotionally. If they don't know what to do with that, you're literally like getting them emotional and then sending them off into the world, and it makes things worse. So you don't want to do that. You don't really want to do that anyway, but when you're doing certain models of therapy, that matters. And so I will ask questions like that to try to get a sense of how their conflicts are. And I do that. I ask basically the same questions to each spouse. I might ask it a little bit different ways, but basically the same questions. If they both answer the same, then you have a pretty good idea of what's going on. If they answer different, then you know that something else is probably happening, which has happened where one spouse has said, yeah, that, 2 weeks ago, I threw this lampshade at him, or I grabbed her, or whatever. And the other spouse doesn't bring that up. That happens sometimes. And so you want to be mindful of that. If there's active things that are happening, then most therapists will not meet with them as a couple until that has been de-escalated and kind of brought under a little bit more control. So that's kind of a separate thing. I have a colleague, she's actually a friend of mine, that has done extensive research in this area, and has she with some other folks have developed actually they're starting to develop a model of therapy where you can work with both the spouses together, even if there's active conflict. You still do some individual work, but you work with them together a little quicker than you normally would. That actually is happening a little bit more now. It just kind of depends on your ability and where you are, and how comfortable you feel working with those folks. But because that particular type of interaction can get out of hand really quickly. And so that's one kind of area to assess for. The other area to assess for is just in general, when they have a conflict and things get escalated, what does it look like and what does it feel like? Because the odds are strong at some point, there's going to be some escalation in the therapy room or virtually at some point. So you want to try to understand if that's happened, like what that looks like. I have found that, a high percentage of clients will say, yeah, we fight and this is what it looks like and this is what happens. And they'll talk about it pretty openly. But a lot of times they'll talk about it openly because they're tired of doing it and they don't want to do that anymore. So I sometimes, I use a lot of humor in sessions. And one of the things I usually tell people as they talk about that is I'll say things like, well, you sound like an expert in this particular way that you interact right now. And we want to help you become an expert in another way. Like you communicate this way, you're an expert in how that's happening. Hey, let's become an expert in something else. And so that's literally what you try to help them do. So the first thing you have to think about is how do we take something that's escalated and start to de-escalate it, right? In other words, how do we soothe something that's up here? How do we start to help it soothe? So there's a couple of different things to think about. The first thing is, how does that individual, each of those individuals soothe themselves? Do they even know how? Have they ever known how? Has that ever been something they've thought about? Is that something they've thought they've actually been in control of? Sometimes people look at anger as, I'm not really in charge of it, so I'll just wait till it goes away, which is a strategy. You can do it that way. You also can be proactive and do things that help you start to soothe yourself. And so the second thing I do as I think about de-escalation is I teach everybody I work with, every couple, every family. I've even done this in my family. I teach them how to take timeouts. And so, you know, some people call those taking a break. I call it timeout. There's 3 rules to a timeout. They're pretty simple. If you follow them, it works about 90% of the time. If you don't follow them, it will never work. You have to kind of follow the rules. The first rule is anybody can call a timeout. Any person can say, I need a timeout. The other person has to respect that timeout. And these are rules that you go over with them together. You know, you talk about it together. You have to respect the timeout. The second rule is the timeout is for a specific amount of time. At least 20 minutes. I don't like going more than 60 minutes personally. The reason why I say 20 is it takes the human, takes us, our brains, our bodies, physiologically, about 20 minutes on average to calm down, if we're doing something that helps us calm down. So 20 minutes is a minimum. I think 60 minutes is a max. Because if you get past 60 minutes, the person that didn't call the timeout starts to really get more impatient and anxious again. The third rule is that the person that called the timeout is the person that re-engages the conversation, and they kind of keep the time too. So if me and my spouse are in a conflict and it starts to escalate, and my spouse calls timeout, I respect the timeout. We know that it's going to be for 30 minutes, let's say. At the end of the 30 minutes, she's going to come back and re-engage the conversation. This is where you start to ask more questions about, what do you do to help yourself calm down? What do you do to help yourself relax more? What do you do to help yourself kind of de-escalate? In other words, how do you soothe yourself? Some people take a drive, some people go on a walk, some people listen to music. I ended up having several clients for a while. This was mainly because of COVID, because they were together all the time. Like create this kind of space in their closets where they would have a pillow and they'd go and scream into a pillow, and kind of like that would help them kind of release some tension, kind of relax. I teach breathing exercises. I teach tapping techniques to people. We talk about mindfulness. I talk about visualizations. I do a lot of different things with people depending on where they're at. But that teaching them how to take a time out helps them to gain control over what's happening. But it also helps them to kind of soothe, because the goal of the timeout is not to stop talking. The goal of the timeout is to continue conversations. And it's really hard to have a conversation when you're escalated so much. I even have called timeouts in the session with people before. So that brings me to the next point. If you're in a session and things have escalated and you can tell when they're going to really start to overflow, it's better if you can kind of catch it early and kind of take charge of the session, so to speak. And I've asked clients to leave the room and then come back. I've done that. One of the things that has been interesting about doing things virtually is that I've actually asked one spouse to go to another room in the house and get back on, like either on their phone or their iPad or something, to get back on the session. Even that physical distance has really helped folks. I've even had clients now that where the conflicts have been high, and there's been a lot of them, have gotten on the virtual session in separate rooms automatically. And I already know that they've kind of been fighting, but that's good, because they've kind of they've been assertive about knowing they need to calm down, and they kind of do it separately. That's actually been a really helpful thing. In terms of like helping people soothe, you can teach them to do it virtually or in person the same way. And again, it really depends on how they respond, like how their brains kind of respond to it, and what helps them to calm and relax. Because a lot of times what's underneath anger is something else, like fear or hurt, or even certain kinds of anxiety that kind of run kind of deeper. And so a lot of times when you're trying to soothe that, not necessarily just the anger or what you see underneath or on top. You're trying to soothe whatever is underneath. And so when you can figure out what that is, that really helps to kind of soothe them. So hopefully that makes sense. I get a lot of questions about things like this in the classes and when we talk about working with couples. And so I just start talking about it. So hopefully does that make sense to everybody? Any questions about that?
When you have a couple and they're escalating in your office and you ask them to leave the room, do you ask them both to leave the room, or you just ask one of them to leave the room? How does that, and how does that affect the way they feel toward you?
Yeah, I typically ask whoever is the most like about to explode person,
Yeah.
typically, and I go with them
Okay.
out of the room and go to like in our waiting room where I was in my former practice and say, hey, here's what's happening. And I might spend like 4 or 5 minutes with them talking, trying to understand where they're coming from. And then I might have them come back and ask the other person to leave at that point. I'm so sorry. Hang on just 1 second. I'm so sorry. Hang on just 1 second. You say that again, Mackenzie.
Sure. I was just saying, if you leave with one and then they come back in and then you want to take the other one out, do you go out with that second person and kind of do the same thing and then you come back together?
Yep.
Okay.
I'll spend time with each of them. I've only had 2 clients ever walk out and not come back. Like one client walk out and never come back. I have had people walk out on their own and then come back. That's happened too. If I can keep them together and help them to soothe themselves, or you can teach co-soothing later as you go. You can teach co-soothing with them. If I can do that, that's awesome. That's great. You know, I would only ask them to kind of separate if I can tell that you can just tell that they're just not, they're being overrun with all these like really high emotions. And so you want to try to bring that down if you can. So if I ask one of them to leave though, I always do try to spend time with each of them. I don't like, hey, get out, come back later. I don't do that. I usually go with them and try to help in that way. So I have on occasion virtually even asked one of them, hey, can you just step out? Let me talk to her real quick. And then could you guys flip-flop places? Even virtually, I've done that with people. The one thing I will say, if it happens, if it continues to happen a lot, then then something else is going on in my mind. And I might say, hey, I feel like I'm stuck right now, or something's not working. Would you guys mind if we just spend maybe a couple of sessions where I meet with each of you individually, just so we can talk and because sometimes people want to get things out, but they have a trouble with the other person there, because every time they start talking and maybe even become vulnerable, what happens? The other one gets upset and comes in and cuts them off or stops them, or, and so in that way, you're trying to kind of figure out, hey, maybe what we're doing right now is not working. Let's change it and try to do it a little bit differently. So that's a long answer too.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. That's great.
Any other questions about that? Okay. I just bring this up because the conflict pieces are really, those can be really difficult to help people work through. And some of that goes back to childhood for people, like probably a lot of it, because we learn a lot of things in childhood that we don't think about, like how to communicate with people, how to do conflict with people, how to love, how to be married, or how to deal with money. There's a lot of things we learn in childhood, either directly or indirectly, that we don't really think about until we get married or until we find a significant other. We sometimes things like lay dormant in us, even as kids. We might, grow up, we graduate, go to college, and there's certain issues that we dealt with in our family that might just kind of lay dormant. And I've seen that happen where something's dormant and all of a sudden you have kids and it just comes right back to the surface. And so when that's happening, it's really important to be able to dig into, like, where does that come from? Like, help me understand where this is coming from. What's going on with that? And help me understand, I've got a couple I'm working with right now that they grew up totally, literally exactly opposite, where, even down to how each parent interacted with them. The husband, his father was super active, and his mom was too, but his father was super active and very supportive, and kind of like did everything for everyone, was like had kind of a servant heart for the family and did everything. And so that's how this guy is. Well, the wife, she grew up in a family where she had to do everything for herself, her parents. Her dad was an alcoholic. She used to drive him back from the bars, even as early as 13 years old. She used to take care of the kids. She had to purchase things for herself when she got into high school. She got out of the home when she was 17. So she's been totally independent, literally. And every male influence in her life has been, like, in her mind, useless. And now she's married to this guy that's like covets her and loves her, but she doesn't like it because it doesn't feel right. And as we go through family histories and they're talking about it, a light bulb goes off in her head and she's like, oh my gosh, you're like the first guy in my life that's really ever treated me with respect. Like, I didn't say that, she said it. And it wasn't like an aha moment where we all cried. It was like more of like, oh, okay, wait a minute. This makes sense why you get my door for me and pump my gas and do these things, or do, other things that you do for me, especially financially, for her. And so it allowed, when we talk about childhood, or we talk about things from the past, to me, if we bring it back to how we assess people that we work with, how people talk about their childhood and their past can give you a lot of information about how they handle things in the present. Because things from the past don't give us excuses as much as they give us explanations for how we do things and why we do things. And so you can get a lot of information from that. I typically don't I don't camp out in the past of someone unless something really traumatic has happened and maybe we need to kind of process through it. But I keep trying to bring it to the present as much as possible, because that's where we're living now, and we want to stay in the present as much as possible. And so when you're working with folks, that's one of the things that you can kind of think through is, was this something that they learned in childhood? And if so, how did they learn it? And when I say childhood, it could even be like high school that something happened and they went through something. I mean, and it doesn't have to be severe trauma either. It could be almost anything that they went through. I've had plenty of adults in their 40s and even 50s talk about things to them that was as traumatic as like being bullied in school, or different things that maybe they hadn't even talked about in 30 years that they would bring up. And so when people bring things up like that, there's a vulnerability there and there's something to that they're doing, that they're bringing up for a reason. And when they bring it up in the context of the person that they're married to or with, that vulnerability, you have to really take care of it and show care to that, so that the spouse, especially if they've never heard it before, can kind of be like, okay, let me try to understand it. Because a lot of times when we show vulnerability, it becomes uncomfortable and you can feel the tension in the room almost. And sometimes people don't like that and they'll kind of push back against it. And so these are all things that you definitely pick up and get better at as you go. But I like talking about this specifically because these are some of the questions I usually get asked, especially in this class when we talk about marriage and family. So any other questions about any of these things that I've been talking about? Oh, all right. Okay. Any questions about anything we talked about today? Any thoughts, comments, questions, anything?
I have another question.
Yep.
When you start off with a new couple, do you always meet with them separately first?
I always meet with them together first,
And then separately?
and then separately within the first couple, like the next couple of sessions, I'll meet with them individually.
Mhm.
Sometimes I'll do that, like the session, like we'll do a whole session, but 30 minutes will be with one and then 30 with the other one. That's typically what I do. The only other time that I personally meet with couples individually is if I get stuck or something's happening and we're not making progress, and I kind of want to change some things up and maybe ask some more direct questions to one of them. But that doesn't happen. And if I do that, that's like no more than 3 sessions, I would do something like that, really. Now, I have had clients come into as an individual first, and then they want their spouse to come, which is fine. But for me, that's kind of like ethically speaking, you kind of have to, for me, I kind of have a line where if I meet with an individual 1 or 2, maybe 3 times, and then they want their spouse to come, and that's fine. I'm going to meet with their spouse at least 1 or 2 times before I meet with them together. But if I've met with an individual for some time, like if we've done 4 sessions or more, typically they're my client then and not their marriage. And so I will, refer them to someone else. And I know different people do have kind of different rules about that. I know people do that differently. I'll bring that up because I will often, when I'm working with couples, I will often refer them individually to other therapists because I think it can help them to work on things individually that help us when we work together. So I will, especially if I've done, I've had times where it seems like there's something going on with one of them individually, and I'll give them, like I've got a couple of assessments in it's Simple Practice that I give. It's like a battery of things, and I give it to them, and they can tell me, hey, one of these folks is going through some depression right now, or something's happening, and I can look at it specifically, and I can talk about it with them and say, hey, this might help you if you kind of go and talk to someone individually about these things for yourself, because it's going to help your marriage. I do things like that because I think that's great. I've got people I refer to, like I've got a list of people I refer to, and then those folks refer to me. We kind of refer to each other for all those things. And so that's that's probably more information you want to know, but that's what I do.
Thank you.
That's what I do. And everyone kind of does it different a little bit. So Dr. Hibbert might do it different. He's been doing it for longer. So he might have a different way that he would do it.
Yeah. When you refer out for individual work, do you then discuss with the other counselor, or like collaborate together, or
if they give consent? So if they give consent, then we do. If they don't give consent, then we don't.
Yeah.
So it's kind of up to them. I've never had anyone not give consent. It was a lot easier when I was in the practice, when there were 4 of us and we were in person, we could refer to each other. We gave a list, but a lot of times people would come to our practice because they were already coming there. That was a little bit easier, but I've still, like Dr. Armstrong and I work together a lot. And so we usually get consent to talk with each other about clients that I refer to him or vice versa. And so it really helps a lot when you have a good partnership with other people that you kind of already worked with. So, because they understand your style and you understand theirs, and that really does help a lot.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anything else? All right. There's a couple of things I'd like to, I know this is our last time we're going to meet. I'm going to take the last 10 minutes to just ask a couple of kind of questions for myself to understand, because I'm thinking about making a few changes to how I teach virtually. And so I want to ask, if you guys don't mind, just ask a couple of questions about, because some of you have had me in other classes too. And so I'd like some feedback on a couple of things. One of the things that I'm wondering about, and I've been asking all my classes this general question. Do you guys have a preference over in-person classes or virtual classes? Depending on, I know sometimes it depends on the class, but like a class like this, and I teach lifespan, I'm going to teach professional counseling in the spring, and I'm actually going to teach advanced counseling techniques and skills in the fall. Do you guys have a preference on virtual, face-to-face? What do you got? I'm just kind of curious to what you guys think.
I've actually not yet had an in-person class. I do know from past schooling that it is very beneficial to have just that FaceTime with people. I think that people are a little bit more hesitant to speak up on a Zoom call. At least that's been my experience personally. But I, as a working mom of 5, enjoy the ease of rolling out of bed and turning on the camera instead of waking up, getting dressed, driving to campus or something like that. So I think there's definite benefits to both of them, but in my situation, online is definitely easier.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
I
I would
agree
say
with Beth.
the same.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, no, go ahead.
I was just saying that I agree with Beth. Unless it's like a weekend class, it's really hard for me to make it happen because I work and I go to school. I actually have 2 jobs. So it's really hard for me to make it happen unless it's like a Saturday morning.
Okay.
Well, and even weekend for me, like I remember the class that you were doing the intake assessment with, I believe, I forget her name, but I was literally sitting in the stands at my son's wrestling tournament listening. So it was very convenient for me to be able to do that instead of missing his tournament and to be in class because I think it was a valuable class. So anyways, it's just very convenient.
Okay.
Yeah, I was
Anybody
going to say the same. It's more convenient, but I think I find that this semester and last, I've had one in person and one online, and I feel like I retain more information. And I guess I feel like there's better. I know you ask a lot, do you have questions? Do you have comments? But I feel like that conversation is easier in an in-person class. But I think it's nice to be able to have a combination of, in person and online, because it would be hard to go, more than once a week. I think it's just a lot with work and everything else.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I agree with Renee. I've taken only 2 in-person classes and I'm almost done. But I've also had classes that are, it seems like before COVID, an online class through Amberton was like, you are completely on your own studying. You never have any interface with the professor. And I really like having a combination of both. Also, I live over an hour from the school. So when I drive down, it's like a 5 to 6 hour ordeal. But I really also love those in-person classes. The interaction is definitely more comfortable sometimes than the Zoom format.
Mackenzie, you live an hour from Garland or Frisco?
I live north of Flower Mound. So during that rush hour time, it's like an hour and 15 minutes sometimes drive down and back, which I can do and I have done, but it's really difficult with lots of kids and their activities are all in the evening. So it is really nice. I prefer the hybrid of online, but lots of interaction with the teacher where things can be discussed. I feel like I retain the information much better in this format when we're talking about it and we can kind of see our peers and all of that.
Okay, thank you.
And I'll just add before you move on, Chris, for me, it's a combination of everything that everyone has just said. Obviously for me now, this last few months, I've been in South Carolina, so there isn't any coming to campus for me, but it's the same for me, Mackenzie. I live in North Fort Worth, and so that drive either to the Frisco or the Garland campus, even on the weekend, is, very taxing. But I think where we get to engage in an online platform when you have a Zoom open like this, we get to engage with you. I don't feel like we get the same engagement that we would have if we were in a classroom setting with our classmates. because I know that even sitting before I took my break from Amberton and I had all in-person classes, sitting in a class, if something was said or something was missed, you might be able to turn to your table mate or someone at the table behind you or in front of you and catch up, you know, either that way or have that cross conversation and say, I didn't get it that way, or it didn't sit with me in the same way or something like that. So, and you don't get as much as that interaction on Zoom without having to like leverage the chat, which then becomes a different distraction.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, and I agree with that as well. I've had 4 in-person classes, and although I love the convenience of the Zoom classes and getting the education from home, I found that the in-person classes have been so much more enriching in terms of what I learn, how I learn it, and more importantly, building connections and relationships with other students. I've yet to build a quote relationship, a professional relationship or friendship with a student via Zoom, but in the 4 classes that I've gone to, I've met, you know, two other students that I've connected with and continue to have conversations with outside of class around, you know, professional or topics in our profession, and I think that's really important and really valuable. And I just think it gets missed in Zoom. I think the convenience drives everybody to jump on, get what they can get from Zoom, and then jump off. And there's a whole element of the education that's missed there.
I have one more.
I agree with you, Mike.
I agree too. I've met a few people in my 2 in person and that's been really nice. But I also think something that I've had some Zoom classes where we met every week, you know, for a shorter time, but that maybe gave me a little more, maybe that was a little more helpful for me. Just the continuity of having something on a more regular basis was nice.
Okay. Anybody else? I'm writing notes. That's why I'm looking down, by the way. You guys care if we say in person, right? Would it matter if it's during the week or on the weekend? Like if it's Saturday, obviously. Would you rather do Saturday or during the week if it was in person? Or even if it's a hybrid of something, right?
I prefer during the week, just because my husband works full time. We're busy with kids' activities during the week, you know, school and getting them to and from, and we often don't get to spend our time together until the weekends. And so for me personally, that's how I've arranged my next semester's classes. Is I have to drive to Garland from Frisco on Tuesday and Wednesday, because I'd rather do that than spend half of my Saturday away from family. So.
Yeah. Okay.
Are the Saturday classes every week or are they every other? I've heard of mix.
Every other week.
Every other.
You meet 5 times.
Mm-hmm.
And there's two separate Saturdays. There's Saturday 1, there's Saturday 2, but each one of them you only meet 5 times.
So you could take a Saturday 1 and 2 class and it would be every Saturday then?
It would be every Saturday
okay.
Yep. In that way. Yep. That's right. The big difference pre-COVID is there were no choice. Most classes were in person for the most part. Or like Mackenzie, like you were saying, you were kind of on your own if you took one online. I didn't teach a ton of DL before COVID. I taught a few, but not very many. Everything was in person. So you just drove, like you just knew you were driving. Like that was just how it was. The thing that seems to me that's changed is now that we've had choice of being virtual, not everyone wants to go back to doing in person, driving to Garland on a Wednesday night every week or something like that, or driving to Frisco or whatever. So that's one of the reasons why I'm asking, because it's the other thing that I want to know is, and please don't think you're going to hurt my feelings, or I'm trying to get better at doing this, because I think the virtual classes are not going to go away. It's going to stay in some way or another. And so I want to get better at it because I don't think I'm as good virtually as I am in person. And I'm trying to get better at being virtual. What helps you guys either in other classes you've been in? What's been good about some virtual classes that you've taken? Like what aspects have been helpful? Like when you guys are saying, you know, sometimes some of the education is missed and like retaining information in person maybe is a little bit better. Like what could I do? What could we do but better virtually teaching wise to make these classes better? What do you think?
I was gonna say
For
like,
me,
oh, go ahead, Deanna.
sorry, Mackenzie.
That's okay.
I was gonna say for me and piggybacking off of what I said about having the interaction with the classmate, like breakout rooms after something has been presented so that we can have conversation about it and again have that time to see what did you get from that, what did you get from that, and then have our own aha moments on the material as opposed to just having it spoon fed to us throughout the session.
I completely agree, Deanna. That's exactly what I was going to say, because I think I've connected more with classmates when we do have those breakout sessions and, you know, follow up with what was just talked about and just kind of connecting more on that level. So.
Well, another thing, like we did that, Dr. Springer used to do that a lot at the end of hers, like break us out, and that was nice. And then last session in Dr. Armstrong's, he gave us like it was an advanced counseling techniques, but so maybe that just made sense. But he gave us a partner, and we were supposed to like meet, you know, on FaceTime or Zoom or whatever outside of class. So we got to, you know, have more of a conversation with just one person. And that was helpful too, just to practice and also to meet someone a little bit more than just being on Zoom.
Yeah, that's a great point. A couple of the teachers do, I mean, we have the textbooks and we read them, but there's so much information in there. And a couple of teachers I've had have done PowerPoints of just kind of the topics that they feel like are most important to focus on. And then that PowerPoint is available on Moodle, so you can go back to it. That's been particularly helpful to me. Like I read the whole textbook, but if I know that these 10 topics are, you know, top on her list of things that need to be known, I will pay more attention, I guess, during that reading, or just really try to absorb more of that. But you do a really good job of asking for questions and then giving like a long pause. I feel like some of my classes, they're like, any questions? And then it's like they move on and there's no time to kind of process for a minute and then get the nerve to then ask the question.
Yeah.
And to that point, Chris, because I've had you both in person, although it's been, I think, 2 years.
It's been a while.
Well,
Yeah,
3
it's
years.
been a while. Yeah, it's been a while.
It's been 3 years.
Yeah.
I feel like you are consistent in the person that you were as a professor on ground, as well as what I see on Zoom. So.
Okay, thank you. Does everyone like having PowerPoints?
Yes.
Or does anyone not like it?
I think they're helpful.
Okay.
I'm sure there are a lot of work on the teacher's end, but I save those and go back to them.
Yeah.
I save them as well.
So do I. Absolutely.
Okay.
I've even referred to PowerPoints from, I had a friend of mine she works in the, she does brain stuff. I can't think of the name right now. It's too early on Saturday, but, and she was asking me questions and I referred back to that to be able to help her from, I think it was Dr. Armstrong's class. So.
Okay. All right. Any Okay. What time is it? See, I knew I was gonna run out of time. if you guys think of other things, please don't hesitate to send them. I know everyone does evaluations. Like you guys have gotten emails about it, and we get evaluated, and they're great, but they don't tell me a lot. Like it doesn't help me that much in terms of like having discussions like this and getting direct feedback helps me a lot more. And so the evaluations are great, and everyone should do them. And we do, and I do take information from them, but this is a lot more helpful to me. And so if you think of other things, please don't hesitate to bring it up or send me an email or whatever. That's it. I don't want to keep going because it's already 11. So any other questions about anything? Any other comments? This is it. Your last chance. Okay.
Just thank you for everything.
You bet. Thanks for showing up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, and you guys have a great weekend, and I'll see you sometime.
Thank you.
Thanks so
Thank
much.
you. Have a good one.